Hello, everyone. I want to welcome you to the Free Man Beyond the Wall podcast. This is your host, Pete Quinones. I invited Wally Conger to come on the show. Wally is the author of a little pamphlet called Agorist Class Theory. Wally, how are you doing today?
Very well. How are you, Pete?
I'm doing good. I wanted to have you on because you wrote a treatise. I'll call it a treatise because it's really not that long. It's not book length, but it's also not article length, that has inspired me a lot. But before we start getting into this and digging into it, why don't you tell everybody about yourself? You've never been on the show before, and I always ask people to do that.
Okay. Well, I never thought I'd say this, but I'm an old timer in the liberty movement, the freedom movement, the libertarian movement, whatever you want to call it. And I got involved way back in 1970. I was 15 years old, and I was a young Republican. And I was a member of YAF. I don't know if you know of YAF, Young Americans for Freedom. And they had a big fissure, a big split. And the libertarians split off from the conservative kids. And I was attending a little event, YAF event in Glendale, California. I wasn't even driving at the time, so somebody had to drop me off and pick me up from there. And it was invaded while I was there. The meeting was invaded by a bunch of black flag waving anarchists. And I started talking with them. They gave me just armloads of literature. And through that literature, I was introduced to Karl Hess, Murray Rothbard, von Mises, all sorts of people, Albert J. Nock, and the rest is kind of history. So the rest of my life has been 50 years, has been up and down and up and down. Some involvement, some writing, other times just, trying to, get by and, survive in Los Angeles with my corporate job and that type of stuff. But that's where I'm coming from.
So the work that we're going to talk about today, the first thing we have to do is talk about the title, because I think a lot of people read the title and they jump to conclusions. So this is based off of some unfinished work that Samuel Edward Konkin III did, but it is titled, and I assume this is your title, Agorist Class Theory, a left libertarian approach to class conflict analysis. Now, most people see that, and all they see is left libertarian. So can you explain why you use the term left libertarian?
Right. I used it because Sam Konkin always considered himself a left libertarian. And he ran or founded the Agorist Institute, but also the movement for the libertarian left. And by libertarian left, he always meant Murray Rothbard's definition of the left back in the mid-1960s, when he was publishing a journal called Left and Right, and had written an essay called, Left and Right?
Prospects for
Liberty. I can't remember the whole Prospects for Liberty. Thank you. He just always considered that we didn't have left and right was just a long, straight horizontal line. And at one end was the right, where he threw everybody from Marx and Stalin and Pol Pot, all those types on one end. And he had absolute anarchy on the far left end. So anyway, that was his way of viewing the political spectrum. As it was also the way that Karl Hess wrote about it in his book Dear America back in the mid-70s. He talked about just one long horizontal line, with the far left being anarchism and absolute freedom, and the far right being every kind of despotic, dictatorial regime you could imagine. And Hess kind of grouped, in his book, he talked about where would FDR be? Where would Truman be? Where would Kennedy have been? And kind of laid them all out on this line. And they were all in a gray, but they were definitely rightward. They were not leftward, no matter how left-wing they supposedly were in media standards.
Yeah, it's interesting that in that treatise, Left, Right, and the Prospects for Liberty, he actually basically calls the progressive era a right-wing plot.
Yes.
And that, I know that confuses people when they hear it, because, the term progressive, and, I mean, obviously Wilson was a progressive, and, but most people would say that was all the way left. But in this 1965, great. I mean, Scott Horton was the one who told me first to read it. He's like, you have to read Left and Right Prospects for Liberty. And that's what he sends to people on the left. When he's like, okay, this is what we believe, he always sends that to the people on the left, because Rothbard, right from the beginning, just starts attacking the right.
Exactly. And the reason I really stuck to the left libertarian label, and this booklet, whatever you want to call it, it's only about 38 pages long, and the meat of it is probably 25 pages long, was because Sam Konkin always considered himself a left libertarian by Rothbard standards, and even more so, he considered himself a radical Rothbardian. He considered himself more Rothbardian than Rothbard. So I just thought, that's well. And when I put the thing together, what was it, 15 years ago? Almost 15 years ago, I think. There was still a Konkin that just passed away. I think he died in 2004 or 5. Mm-hmm. And he and I had not been close, but we worked together on things. And in fact, I edited the last newsletter that he published. I think it was Tactics for the Movement on the Libertarian Left. So that's why I stuck with the left terminology. And there are a lot of us calling ourselves leftists, left libertarians. In the last 10 years or so, that's changed a lot. It's more like a liberal left libertarian. When you're talking about left libertarians, people think, oh, yeah, they're woke libertarians.
The woke libertarians and the libertarian socialists have co-opted that phrase, and now not so much the right libertarians or the center libertarians, but the far right libertarians. That's all they want to talk about. If they post up a picture of this treatise, they'll circle left libertarian just so people because they know that their own people aren't going to read it. So it's like, okay, so we're just going to discredit this right up front because, they're discrediting themselves. So here you go, right there.
Exactly.
All right. So,
no,
go ahead.
I understand that too. No, I understand that. Right? In today's world, I do understand that. But at the time, and in his whole politically active career, Sam Konkin was always trying to pull the libertarian movement back to what he thought was its real home, the left. He always thought that libertarianism was a leftist movement. So, for what it's worth.
All right. Well, then, basically what this treatise does, it's called Agorist Class Theory, is you're looking at Marx's class theory, and it does a pretty good job of decimating it. But before we get to that part, can you talk a little bit about the Marxist doctrine of the class war?
Well, it always struck me that it's busier than it needs to be. And there's the exploiting class and the exploited class. And it was pure economics, philosophically for Marx. And the exploited class, of course, were the proletariat, the workers, the downtrodden, whoever wasn't holding the purse strings, and the capitalists, the bourgeois, whatever, were the exploiting class. And I don't know where to go from here. I mean, I feel like going directly into Agorist Class Theory at this point, because there isn't really much to dissect. You know, I think most of us are convinced, certainly the people who are listening to this podcast have been pretty well convinced that the Marxism altogether is a dead issue.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, not in universities, but in real life it is.
Why don't I read this? We'll start off by the 5 points that Konkin had in New Libertarian Notes number 28 in 1973. Right. He says, 1, the state is the main means by which people live by plunder. The market, in contradistinction, is the sum of human action of the productive. I mean, Mises could have wrote that. Rothbard could have wrote that. Yeah. So
absolutely.
Part 2 is the state, by its existence, divides society into a plundered class and a plundering class. I think that's anyone who's listening to this would be able to agree with that. Right. The state, yeah, okay, this is where it starts getting interesting. The state has historically, the state has historically been directed by those who gain most by its existence, the upper class, ruling class, higher circles, or conspiracy. What do you think the word conspiracy he's using there? How do you think he's using it?
I think he's using that term. It's a nod to the John Birch Society, actually. You know, okay. Look at the John Birch Society was very big in the late 50s, early 60s. Konkin was writing in the early 70s. He started writing this kind of stuff back in the late 60s. And there were a lot of Birchers who hadn't been banished by the National Review from the conservative movement yet, or hadn't felt banished enough to stay away. And so I think he was almost addressing them. And I'm trying to remember when the book None Dare Call It Conspiracy came out. That was the late 60s, I think, maybe early 70s. Anyway, that book came out of the John Birch Society. And the change that happened in the John Birch Society, especially during the 60s, was they went from, you know, the bad guy was always the communists. The commies. And then it became the Great Conspiracy. It went beyond. Somebody had a woke moment in the John Birch Society and said, you know, if you go back historically and you look, as Rothbard did, at the progressives at the turn of the 19th into the 20th century, these people were, quote unquote, capitalists. They were supposed to be free marketeers, laissez-faire. They really weren't. They were just looking for means to fight off their competitors, and they used the state to do that. And so, as I recall, I haven't read it in a long time. It's not a bad little book. None Dare Call It Conspiracy. Most of that book is about the progressive era. A big hunk of it is, and the betrayal of the free market, and I guess the conservative movement for what it was, by these big business people. You know, was it Gabriel Coco wrote The Triumph of Conservatism, I think was the name of the book.
Yeah, I have.
That was a biggie for Rothbard. Yeah, that was a biggie for Rothbard. And that's pretty much his argument, you know, was that conservatism, these progressives were actually conservatives, you know, monetarily, and they were just trying to build the state bigger to help themselves and help line their own pockets.
All right, we're going to go on to 4 here. It says the higher circles will fight to keep their privileged status and have done so against libertarians seeking their overthrow and the restitution of their plunder to those from whom it was taken. I don't think we need to comment on that.
No, that goes without saying, right.
The last point is politicians operate as gladiators in the aptly named political arena to settle disputes among the higher circles, which are not monolithic. He puts that in parentheses. And I think that's really interesting because it's, you know, he's basically saying these politicians, they're not there for you and me. They're there just to the quote unquote private businesses in the plunder class when they have problems and when they want to fight against each other, or if they want to combine and become a monopoly of sorts, well, they're there to settle the disputes.
the upper classes, the power elite, whatever you want to call them, have their own turf wars. Carl Oglesby, the Cowboy and Yankee War, Yankee and Cowboy War, which is unfortunately out of print. I wish it would come back into print. But that's basically what he was saying was the upper classes. There was a West Coast wing that kind of swung down into Texas, and there was the East Coast wing, the Yankees, and they were constantly warring with each other, trying to gain a foothold and be dominant. So while the underclass or the middle class or whatever you want to call us are fighting it out, they too are having their own little war going on and struggling to take over each other's territory.
Well, the first thing that you write after the introduction is you write about the failure of Marxism. And your first sentence just says, Marxism is dead, period. But
yeah, well, it was. It seemed to be about 15 years ago.
Well,
nowadays, I'm not so sure.
I was listening to, I can't remember what I was listening to recently, but they were saying that if you were in a college in like the early 90s, if you were going to school in early 90s, late 80s, nobody was talking about Marxism. Marx was not brought up. And if it did, it was in humanities, which that's basically once Marxism, the economic system was basically delegitimized, then they took it into the humanities. But it seems like it's made in the last 15 years, the economic system, people are promoting it again.
Right. I don't think they know what Marxism is as distinguished from socialism or any other ism, actually. But Dave Smith. I was listening to Dave Smith, was a show yesterday or day before, and he was talking about cultural Marxism because he was warned, don't use that term. It's really not, it doesn't really work. But I think his point was that the economics is kind of, the Marxist economics is kind of on the wayside, and now it's just they've taken the whole Marx's idea of the exploited and the exploiting and have turned it into just a big cultural war. So now we've got the whites exploiting the blacks who are exploited, and men, particularly white men, exploiting women, straights, versus gays. There's no real rhyme or reason to it. It's pretty, I think that's what's really confusing people. And so when people are, you did that 2-part deal with Dave Smith, the BLM, which I thought until about 3 weeks ago was the Bureau of Land Management. I still think of it in those terms. That it's a Marxist movement, but it is, but it's not the Marxism my daddy grew up on. You know what I mean? It's a totally different animal now. And so I think the old Marxism is dead. I don't know what this is almost like when the old left became the new left in the 60s. Now we've got the new Marxism. And it doesn't really make sense when you try to analyze it. It's just, whatever excuse we can have for victimizing ourselves or, throwing a Molotov cocktail or something. This is where we go.
Well, this is the part where I tell you how you can support the Free Man Beyond the Wall podcast. You can go over to Patreon. It's patreon.com/Mance Raider. You can go to my website, freemanbeyondthewall.com/store. You can do it there annually. You can do it for fiat, and you can do it for cryptocurrency, or you can do a one-time donation at paypal.me/Mance Raider. Thank you very much. You talk a little bit about precursors to Marxist class theory, because a lot of people say that this theory was really drawn out in the 19th century, but you mention and you quote Sam here talking about how you can go all the way back to Rome.
Then he immediately goes to the two French guys, I can never pronounce their names. I'm never sure, but Denoyer and Comte.
Yeah, Comte de Noyer. Yeah.
Yeah. And they had a much simpler theory, which is pretty much what the Agorist theory is, that it's the plunderers versus the plundered.
Konkin remarks that Rome had 3 citizen classes and then like a 4th alien class that was all written into, and it was all written into legal code. So it's not like, here where it's, if somebody wants to talk about class warfare here and the working class versus this class and everything, it's not. I mean, this was actually encoded in law. So that's pretty interesting. All right. So let's jump into the Agorist critique of Marx's class theory. He was talking about how the entrepreneurial problem is unsolvable for Marxism.
They don't understand entrepreneurism. The entrepreneurs would be thrown up in the exploitive class. They're those who are the exploiters, because they're the entrepreneurs. They come up with the ideas, they finance the thing, they get the whole business running, and then they depend on the working class, the poor working class, to do all the labor, do all the work. And the Agorist class theory doesn't see it like that at all. They see, as Comte de Noyer, whatever, said, as the parasitical class are the ones who are really just, now they're just exploiting the productive class, which would be the entrepreneurs, the guys who are putting up the money, the guys who are building the businesses in the first place. So that was just a major difference that Konkin saw. Konkin also criticized Marx for said that Marx didn't really ever deal with the, Sam always called the counter economy, which is the black market, the gray markets. Even though in Soviet Russia it was always there, but that was after Marx's time. But he didn't anticipate that there would be a counter economy kind of tainting his whole class theory.
What a lot of people don't understand, and I've actually used this on people who refer to themselves as socialists on social media, who usually just tend to be woke progressives and people like that, is the fact that they will make the argument that capitalism cannot exist without the government, that the government has to be there to protect property, the government has to be there to lend favors, which it does, which is the lending favors part right now is very huge, but they don't protect property. I mean, they take people's property. So that would tend to contradict what they have to say. But the most important thing he had to say about the counter economy was that the counter economy is hyper capitalist. It's almost advanced capitalism, and the government that is supposed to be there to protect capitalism, when it comes to the counter economy, they're actively at war with the biggest and purest capitalists in any nation. And that just basically destroys the whole idea that capitalism needs a government. And it, as a matter of fact, because the government exists, capitalism has to be there. And he actually says the more socialist the state, the bigger the counter economy is going to be.
Right, because the market has to fill in the gaps. I mean, right now, during this COVID-19 craziness, there are, I've heard, I haven't seen any here in Reno, but when restaurants were totally shut down and you could only order takeout and drive by and pick it up or have them come out to your car and bring it to you, there were groups that were actually putting together groups of 20, 30 people and having kind of movable feasts, so to say. I'm going to open a restaurant. It's next Thursday night, 8:30, or maybe even later. Meet us at such and such a place, and they put together a restaurant. Everybody goes in. They've got a great chef there cooking the meals for everybody. It's like a big party. You know, we can't gather any more than 10 people at a time, but this would be a bigger group. And the minute they finish socializing, eating, doing everything for the evening, they just break everything down and they're gone. And they leave no sign that they were there. That's the counter economy. that's the market trying to fill a need.
Yeah,
it's not being served by the establishment.
Correct. I know someone in LA right now who has, I'm not going to mention the name, but they're organizing speakeasies because the bars are closed. And so, yeah, they're able to get people to socialize, which is, you know, we are social animals, and make some money on the side. And this, why is this being done? Is because the plundering class has said, no, you can't go out. They don't, my opinion is they don't want people gathering socially right now. So they can talk about how, why are we wearing these masks? Why are we locked up in our house? How come you don't know anybody how come I don't know anyone who's had it, or you know anybody who's had it?
Exactly.
Questions like that. I mean, that may clearly be the reason why they're trying to limit social gatherings at this point, because they got a real taste for power and they don't want to let it go.
No, they don't. And that's the well, you know something, you can almost boil the whole Agorist class theory. The best illustration of it is Ayn Rand, Atlas Shrugged. You know, the producing class finally says, you guys. You know, we're going to start our own, and we're going to not only start our own society, we're going to hide from you, and we're going to be inaccessible. You're not going to be able to fly in because of, I don't know what it was. What was there, a magnetic thing that made the planes crash?
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think Sam Konkin understood that, you know, Rand had the right idea. That was the black market writ large, you know. But the problem with Rand was she always saw the good guys, even though in the novels not so much. There are some really sleazy big business people in her novels, but she always, you know, trumpeted, you know, the big business, you know, I smell freedom whenever I see an enormous smokestack, you know, and belching pollution into the sky, and she's never really recognized that whole problem of the progressive movement in the early 1900s being really a status movement, and those being the enemy. She saw those as being the good guys, the big business, the guy with the Mr. Moneybags from the Monopoly game, you know, with the top hat and all. He was the good guys, and that's not how Konkin saw it. But I think if somebody wants to get an idea of what Sam meant by agorist class warfare, class theory, they ought to read Atlas Shrugged. Yeah, I mean, it's all right there in the book, really.
Well, I think, yeah, Shrugged definitely shows that clearly. I think J. Neil Schulman's book, alongside
that's explicitly, you know, agorist.
Yeah, so that's
a great book.
Yeah, that's the Agorist Atlas Shrugged at less than 1/3 of the pages.
Much less than 1/3. You can read it in a couple of sittings.
Yeah, I think I read it in 48 hours.
Yeah, I've read Alongside Night, probably a dozen times. It's kind of a nice brush up on agorism. And by the way, you know, we've been saying agorist, and ever since Sam Konkin passed away, people started talking about agorists. And I never understood where agorist came from, agorism, because it's the agora. That's the marketplace. And so it would be agorism. So, and I never heard Sam call it agorism. I always heard him refer to it as agorism. So, I mean, that's just a sidebar.
Well, there was something that that was written right at the beginning of this, or it was written at the beginning and then it was reiterated later. And it was talking about how American libertarians never really want to talk about class. And it says they appear to believe that only right-wing kooks and commies talk about ruling class and class structures.
That was true. That was true 20 years ago, I believe. Now you hear about class structures a little more, but there was a time it was a dirty word. And you know, when I don't even know quite what prompted me to start pulling all his Konkin stuff together on class theory. There was something that prompted it. I can't remember what it was, but the right wing, the libertarian movement, just never talked about classes. And so I decided, well, I'm going to do some research on it. There was nothing out there except some, well, if you read Franz Oppenheimer's, The State, or you read from Rothbard and dug through some old Sam Konkin fanzines, New Libertarian and New Libertarian Weekly and stuff, then you'd find some reference to the class war. But other than that, the Libertarian Party never talked about, class theory. They still don't.
They hardly talk about libertarianism.
Yeah.
So if we were going to talk about it, if libertarians were going to make it a part of their conversation, why bring it up if it seems so simple that it's like you have the plundering class and you have the pilfered class? That seems pretty simple. Why would we even talk about it?
Well, you talk about it because if you apply it to things as they are, even in the news today, it becomes more clear who the good guys and the bad guys are, I think. There was a reason. When I was a kid, I loved Westerns. I loved Western stories, Western movies. I still read Western novels all the time now. And what I think I liked about them was they were just obvious good guys and obvious bad guys. I mean, there's some gray areas here and there. And, movie-wise, when Peckinpah came out with the Wild Bunch back in the late 60s, there was all gray. But, the bad guys were always the guys putting up the fences, they were the ones who were grabbing all the property they could, trying to take over the town, trying to be the big power monger in town. They owned the saloon, they owned the doctor's office, they owned the dentist, they owned the whorehouse, they owned everything. And it wasn't until years and years later that I realized, I know what appealed to me about that stuff was it was an obvious class structure, and it was a libertarian type class theory, where you had the plunderers and the plundered. And thank God, in most of the Westerns, the plundered people always won at the end. They either shot and killed the plunderer, or was torn apart by coyotes. So that I think that this all goes back to when I put this thing together back 15 years ago or so. There was a part of the libertarian movement, of which I was a part, the movement of the libertarian left, that was trying to appeal to the left. And so by publicizing the fact that, oh yes, we have a theory of the classes. It's different than yours, but it's a theory of the classes, and it's a theory of exploited and exploiters. And but here's how ours works. I think that was part of the thinking. Now, when you contacted me and said, I read this book years ago, and it really struck me, and I thought, wow, someone actually is still reading this kind of material, because you just don't see it, especially in the liberty movement.
The thing I really love about this work is it just devastates so many Marxist arguments. I mean, you can use this, what essentially the meat of it is really like 10 pages. And you can destroy pretty much any economic, any Marxian economic argument at all with this. And that's why it had such an impact on me when I read it, because I'm reading it and I'm going ding, and it's just like ding, 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 ding. Oh, I'll never.
Now,
go ahead.
Pete, where were you at the time? Philosophically, where were you at the time when you read it?
Oh, I was already an agorist.
Okay.
Yeah. So it was, I understood, as soon as a government forms, a black market forms, the bigger the government, the bigger the black market. I understood what counter economics could do. I've been involved in counter economics pretty much all my life, but I mean, there was a stretch of 5 to 7 years where I survived completely counter economically. And I actually did rather well. Sometimes better than I'm doing now. But but what really got this was just looking at Marx's class theory and looking at his whole idea of capitalism, free market, laissez-faire, whatever you want to call it, can't exist without a government. And then it's so logical that the biggest capitalists working in a free market are the people working in the black and the gray market right now. And the government will throw them in jail or kill them at the drop of a hat. So that argument is just completely destroyed.
Right. And the crazy thing is the left is always addressing capitalism. Well, when they say capitalism, they mean state capitalism, which is not what we're talking about at all. It's like the changing of the terms. It's like the liberals in the 19th century were liberals. They were property people. They were NAP anti-war types.
Bastiat.
And
like that.
And the term liberal got absconded with. And the same thing with capitalism. You started throwing the label capitalism on everything that was conceivably a free. There's a reason they don't call it the free market. Let me just put it that way.
Yeah.
You don't want the word free in there. Because,
nowhere near it.
you don't want them to think that might be something good.
Yeah. Well, I'm done, man. I just wanted to say thanks for putting this all together and everything. I would have and another great thing about this is if I were to go and try and scour everywhere to find Konkin's writings on this, what you included in this, it would take me months. It would. I don't know I don't even know if I'd find them all. But you were able to find all this and coherently put it together along with your commentary, and it's so short but so powerful. I really want people to read it because and you also see that it says left libertarian in the title, but what you're talking about is you're talking about pure laissez-faire capitalism in here, and that's beautiful to me.
Well, I appreciate that. I really do appreciate it. I wish someone, and it can't be me because I just don't have my hands on it, would just compile a lot of Sam's stuff and put it together. I mean, he's had 2 posthumously, published books in the last, he died 16 years ago, so in the last 16 years. The Agorist Primer was published when 8-9 years ago, something like that. It was quite a few years after Sam had passed away. And then, are you familiar with the Kindle book? What's it called? The Counter Economy from the Back Streets to the Stars.
Yeah. What's fun? Yeah, I have it.
It's a Kindle book. Yeah, it's a Kindle.
Right.
I don't think there's a hard copy of it.
Well,
it's just a Kindle book.
The question
it's a work in progress.
The question I have about it is it really Sam's? Because Sam's name is on it, but I had a question as to whether it's actually Sam's work, and who put it out? Is it Copubco? If Copubco put it out, I would trust
Victor Coleman.
Yeah, I would trust
Victor.
Yeah, I would trust Victor if he's putting that out, that it's Sam's. And that has a lot of information in it. There's a lot of pages. If he put that out in print, that would be a pretty big, pretty thick book. I think it could probably run 300 pages, considering all the information he put in it. And I think he, threw a bunch of writings in on the end and everything. But I haven't been able to dig into that yet because I had questions as to whose it was. So yeah,
right.
I didn't know.
The outline was definitely Sam's. There are paragraphs in it that sound exactly like Sam to me. And I've read so much of his stuff, but I think like I did with the class theory pamphlet, I think Victor has kind of pieced things together and then kind of filled in some gaps here and there. But unfortunately, that's the best we're going to get. Everything was, all of Konkin's stuff is like strewn through hundreds of fanzines and letters and email. If someone could get their hands on just his emails, he had an email list that was phenomenal. I wish I had saved all those emails, but I didn't. And if someone could get a hold of that stuff, it would be a gold mine. Yeah. There's so much, for me, there are two libertarian plumb lines. One was Rothbard, and I had problems with a lot of things Rothbard said. And one was Sam, and I had problems with Sam too. But actually, Murray Rothbard was a funny guy. He was kind of fun to be around the few times I met him. And Sam was pretty cantankerous. He was hard to get along with.
I've heard
you
that.
Could barely see him. You could barely see him through a cigarette smoke when you were talking to him. But that was, and a lot of Sam's stuff also were things that he wrote for talks he gave at these supper clubs in L.A. And we had, back in the 90s, I didn't join them until like the 90s. And I spoke at a couple of them. But in the 80s and 90s, early 90s, well, throughout the whole 90s, there were 2 or 3, libertarian supper clubs. And they have a speaker every month. And we had the Mencken Forum, we had the Knock Forum, we had the Karl Hess Forum, and they were phenomenal. And that's why I met so many people through those things. And that's where I met Butler Schaefer. You know Butler?
Yeah, he just passed last year, I believe.
He just passed last December. His wife and I are actually relatives. We're cousins somewhere back in the murky past. But that's where I first met Butler. And the irony of that was that I went to the supper club to hear Butler speak because I'd just read his Calculated Chaos book. And I wanted to hear him speak. And I was about ready to approach him and introduce myself to him. He introduced himself to me because he had overheard my last name and said, "I've got to introduce you to my wife because she's a Conger."
Oh, wow.
So we became fast friends. But anyway, there's so much material out there. That was my whole point. That's Konkin's stuff. That's I know it's out there. I don't think it's lost to the ages. It's just a matter of somebody grabbing it. And probably Vic Coleman is the one who should be at least, initiating this movement to reinvigorate Konkin's stuff. Because the Agorist movement actually is so much bigger now than it was when Sam was alive.
Sure.
I mean, you should never hear anyone talk about agorism. Just a bunch of, nitwits in Long Beach, sitting in an apartment house, smoking dope. And that was about it. And now, I mean, I see it on Facebook all the time. People identify themselves as agorists. They're not all genuinely agorists, but at least the name is out there. The term is out there.
Well, I got to get going. I just really want to thank you for your time.
Okay, thanks, Pete.
Take care, buddy. Bye-bye.
All right, bye-bye.